All right, good morning, Emily. I'd like to welcome Emily Haymes this morning to our series called The Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science, all ACSM's project. Emily knows all about it because she's on the history committee with me, so I'm thankful that you could come and talk with us this morning.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So we have sort of three big questions that takes about a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is your background, your education, your career. The second one is when did you find out about ACSM? Your career and its intersection with ACSM. And then lastly, the changes you've seen in ACSM and sort of where we're at today and where we may go in the future, and just sort of your take on where we're at today with the American College of Sports Medicine. Maybe some suggestions for the future. But anyhow, let's just start out with your early background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? All that.
Well, I grew up in southwest Missouri in a little town called Marshfield, and it's about 25 miles from Springfield, Missouri.
Sure, okay.
I went to high school, well, all 12 years of school in Marshfield, and at the time I started playing sports when I was a youngster, but had very little competitive experience except in softball and volleyball because of being such a small school.
What years would that have been?
Well, I started to elementary school in 1945, just shortly after World War II ended, and graduated in 1957 from high school.
Okay.
And from high school I went to Drury College. It's now known as Drury University, but it's in Springfield, Missouri. And I went there to major in mathematics because I thought I wanted to be a math teacher. And after a couple of years, I decided, well, maybe I ought to look at another major as well, because I became very interested in physical education from some of the courses that I had taken as an undergraduate.
Were they required classes, Emily?
They were required physical activity classes, and I learned to play a lot of other activities besides volleyball and softball when I was in college, so that exposure was wonderful. And as a result, when I decided to double major with physical education, I took anatomy and physiology. And that was the summer between my junior and senior years, and I just fell in love with physiology. And from that point on, I knew that this was the area that I wanted to continue to work in. So following graduation from college, I went to Florida State University to get my master's degree, and I graduated from Florida State and started teaching immediately.
What year was that when you finished your master's degree?
In 1962. I graduated in December of 62.
Was that degree in physical education then?
It was in physical education because there was no such thing as exercise science
at
that point.
That's right.
And as you mentioned earlier, we had required PE courses in colleges, and so I was able to get a job teaching physical activities in a small college, Mary Washington College, which is in Virginia, and I taught there for 5 years. Now, prior to going to Mary Washington, I went to Valparaiso University
That's Indiana, isn't
That's in Indiana, to take the place of a faculty member who was going on leave. And so I also had some experience teaching there before I went to Mary Washington.
Were you teaching activities then too?
Teaching mostly just activities.
What activities?
Well, a variety. I taught swimming because I had gotten a WSI when I was younger, and I also taught some of the team sports, mostly softball and basketball. And then when I went to Mary Washington, they needed somebody who could teach some of the field sports. So I learned to play field hockey and lacrosse while I was there.
That's not easy.
And taught both of those courses, and as a result, I really love field hockey. So I played that in a league that they had in Virginia.
Very big on the East Coast.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So that's some of my background in terms of teaching.
I have more questions for you, though.
Okay.
Tell me about when you were in high school and then as an undergrad, the situation for women and athletics. Did you play any, were there any opportunities for extracurricular sports at the time?
There was in high school for softball and volleyball. The high schools in my area had a league, and the two sports that they played were softball and volleyball.
Okay.
Softball in the fall, and then volleyball was played in the spring, basically after the basketball season was over, because most
Free up
schools
the gym.
had their gym tied up with the boys' basketball team.
Yeah,
So
I understand.
in college, the only opportunity for competitive sports other than intramurals was in volleyball, because they had what they call sports days, and different colleges would host them, and a number of teams from colleges and universities would come and play.
Was this was when you were at Florida? Or
This was
Florida?
actually when I was at Drury
Oh,
College.
okay. When you were an undergrad.
When I was an
I see.
undergrad.
Yeah, okay.
I think the only opportunities they had at Florida State were intramurals. Perhaps tennis was being played competitively then among the different schools, but the team sports, no.
No, yeah. So you spend 5 years after your master's teaching.
Well, actually, it was probably six
Till
and a half.
you add Valparaiso in,
Right.
and then what?
Well, while I was working on my, actually I should back up. While I was teaching at Mary Washington, the University of Maryland is not that far from Fredericksburg, Virginia. And so I took a graduate class. It was an evening class in advanced exercise physiology. I went up and took a course, and drove up one night per week to take the course, and really enjoyed that course, and I knew that someday I wanted to go on and start working on a Ph.D.
Who taught the class?
David Clark.
I was going to ask, and I thought maybe I was too early, but
No, David Clark.
he was there when I was there, and his father, H. Harrison, of course, was a leader in physical education for a long time.
So I started taking some graduate classes then. I took another one a couple of years later, which was a sports psychology course, and I'd had no exposure.
Was that Burris Hussman?
Burris Hussman.
Yeah.
So those two courses I took. And also while I was teaching at Mary Washington, the person who was teaching the exercise physiology to the undergraduates was Catherine Wells, who's a kinesiologist.
Yeah.
She had come there as a visiting professor after she retired from Wellesley. And when she retired from her second job, I took over and started to teach the undergrad exercise physiology. So that was my first exposure.
Yeah, and you still have a master's degree at this point.
Only a master's degree at this point.
And do you remember the textbook that you used for Dave Clark's class? What was the...
He didn't use a textbook.
He didn't, okay.
We really had assigned topics in there and was taught more like a seminar.
I
So
see.
you had to prepare a specific topic of your interest. And
So you had to do some research on your own?
yes.
Do you remember what you used when you taught the class at Mary Washington? Did you use a text?
I used Herb DeVries textbook.
Yeah, the blue one. I remember it very well. Yeah.
Yep.
Was Karpovich, was that text still popular then?
Yes,
too?
it was. And in fact, I think that was the textbook that Catherine Wells had used in the class.
So what years is this now at Mary Washington?
From 1964 to 1969.
Okay. Then what?
Well, while I was working on my, taking the graduate classes,
Yes. Yeah.
I started to think that maybe I should go on and get a Ph.D. And so I started looking around, and I asked some people who I had for teachers, who they would recommend. And I had about 4 or 5 schools that I sent letters to and applied for entry. One of them being Southern Cal at that time, where Herb DeVries was located. But another one was Penn State. And I was offered several fellowships to come for my Ph.D.
You would have been a perfect Ph.D. student, someone that already had a master's degree, had already been teaching, and that would have been great.
And I wound up going to Penn State. Dr. Buskirk actually came to Virginia to speak at a conference, and I went to the conference and had an opportunity to talk to him, and I was offered a fellowship to come.
How nice. So you were at the Knoll Lab then?
Well, the Knoll Lab wasn't in existence.
Not yet, or not at that
This was
point.
the old locker room for the football stadium that they had converted into the Human Performance Lab.
Okay.
So this preceded the Knoll Lab.
Okay. And what year did you start at Penn State?
1969.
Okay. All right. And what were some of the other faculty there, or who else?
Well, Jim Colias was a faculty member.
Carl Stedefall?
Carl came the year after I started on my degree.
Okay.
Jim Hodson was another faculty member. Jim Skinner was there the first year and then left after the first year, I think, to go to Europe to work there for a while.
I was thinking there was someone there in biomechanics.
Well, Dick Nelson
is
was
who
there.
I was thinking of.
Dewey Morehouse was also in biomechanics, and then Peter Karpovich, Peter Kavanaugh came about 2 years later.
And so what did you do your dissertation and your research in?
Well, I was quite interested in heat tolerance, and so I did my dissertation in that area, and I worked with children primarily because they had a grant to do some heat testing with children, and so it funded my study. And my dissertation work was done with girls between the ages of approximately 9 and 11 years of age.
What did you have? What were they doing?
We had them walk on the treadmill, and we used 4 different temperatures. We used a thermoneutral environment, which was about 70 degrees. We used a warm environment, which was in about the mid-80s. And then we had a hot environment, which was probably around 93 or 4 degrees. And then we tried testing them at an even hotter environment, which was over 100.
Wow.
And that most of the girls couldn't complete an hour's worth of exercise. Now, we broke the exercise up into 20-minute segments so that they had a chance to stop, and we were able to give them fluids. So they had a 5-minute break between each of the 20 minutes.
Was Buskirk your advisor then?
He was,
for that?
yes.
Okay. All right. So what year did you get your Ph.D.?
In 1973, and I stayed another year at Penn State on a postdoc. They had a postdoc that opened up at that time, and I stayed and did a companion study then by testing boys in the same age group.
See a difference?
Yes, the boys were a little more fit, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had opportunities to play sports.
Yeah, absolutely.
Many of them had wrestled. They had wrestling, I think starting in the upper elementary school, that they had the opportunities to do some wrestling. But they had other sport advantages too.
So if they're more fit, does that make them more heat tolerant?
Well, they were more heat tolerant using the test that we used. I think most of the boys could complete that hottest environment. There might have been one or two of the younger boys who had difficulty.
So after your postdoc, then where did you venture to?
Then I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Oh, okay.
And I went there in 1974. And I taught at Boulder for 5 years. I was teaching one of the exercise physiology courses. It was a graduate course. And I taught the undergraduate anatomy and physiology while I was there. And I would also teach usually another undergraduate course, and it varied depending upon which semester it was.
I forgot to ask earlier, it may not have occurred yet, but at what point did you find out about ACSM?
Well, that was back when I was teaching at Mary Washington.
I wondered about that, okay.
Catherine Wells was a member of ACSM, and she knew I was really interested in going on for a Ph.D. because it was during that time that I took the graduate course with David Clark. And she said one day, I belong to an organization that I think you should become a member of. And she said, I am willing to sponsor you to become a member.
You needed sponsors.
So she got the information for me, and I filled out the form, and then she got another faculty member at a different university to be a sponsor as well, and I submitted it and became a member, I think, in 1966.
That was going to be my question next. I wondered, wow, that's very early. Yeah, very early. And you've been a member ever since?
I've been a member ever since.
Probably one of the the longest standing members.
That's possible, yes.
I think Tipton said Frank Booth joined as a student in 67 or 8 or something like that, so close to that time. So you're in Colorado.
Yes.
And did you start going to ACSM meetings then when you became a member? Initially?
No, not during the initial years. The first one I attended was in 1972. It was in Philadelphia. I was still working on my Ph.D., but it was so close that most of the grad students in exercise physiology, and many of them in biomechanics, actually went to that meeting.
Yeah, you could drive down there.
You could drive. And,
now, were you, so you were getting MSSE as a member early on when you joined?
When I first joined, we got the Journal of Sports Medicine.
Which was the FIMS publication.
Exactly. MSSE, I think, started about
1968, I think, or 66 maybe, somewhere around there.
It was after, because I have several of the Journal of Sports Medicine's first.
Early on.
Early on.
They switched, yeah. So where did you go after Colorado?
I moved to Florida State University, and that was in 1979. I became an associate professor because I'd had enough experience by that point that they brought me in as an associate professor.
Was that with tenure too?
No, I went through the tenure process 2 years later.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I forget what town that's in.
That's in Tallahassee.
Tallahassee. Okay. And you were there the rest of your career, and you said you just retired, right?
Yes. I spent 30 years on the faculty, and I retired in the summer of 2009.
Mm-hmm. Now, during that time when you went there, did you have space for a lab? Or
We did. When I first went to Florida State, we were in the old women's gymnasium, and they had converted one of the locker rooms into a laboratory, which was wonderful because we had about 2,400 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
Of laboratory space, and it was not divided up into several rooms, so we had spaces for chemistry labs and a big space for our exercise testing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went there, I negotiated to get an environmental chamber so I could continue to do some
heat stuff? Or?
Heat studies.
Yeah.
Yes.
And did you, was there a doctoral program there then?
Actually, that's one of the reasons why I left Colorado. At the time I was teaching there, they only had a master's degree program. We had a few students who were interested in getting a doctorate, but they had to go through the College of Education, and we had several students who came, stayed 1 year, and didn't like the education courses they had to take, and so they left.
Went elsewhere.
Went elsewhere.
Yeah.
So going to Florida State gave me an opportunity to start working with doctoral students.
Yeah, okay. And how many do you think you've had over your 30-year career, Emily?
Well, it's probably in the high 20s. I think it's about 27 or 28. Mm-hmm. I still have one who's collecting data.
Oh, gee, okay.
So she will probably be my last one.
Sure. And now, did they, or what kind of research did you do in your lab over time? Has that changed along the way? Or?
It has fluctuated somewhat. I started out doing some temperature regulation studies because I had students who were really interested, but most of them were interested in the cold. So we did a series.
Being in Florida, I guess. Or
we did a series of cold studies. In fact, the first 3 doctoral students I had did cold studies.
I'll be darned.
I did then have some students who wanted to do heat stress studies. But the other area that I started working in when I was at Florida State was iron metabolism, and I'd always been interested in iron deficiency and how that might affect especially the women athletes in terms of their performance. So that's when I started doing that work.
Okay, and tell me a little more about that. I know the concept, but what did you find, and what?
Well, some of our early work that we did, we looked at whether the athletes were becoming iron deficient over a training period, and I did one study that lasted about 9 months and found considerable fluctuations in the group of athletes that we were following. One half of the group received an iron supplement, and it was just a normal 18 milligram iron supplement that you might buy when you go to the drugstore. The other group had a placebo all during that time, and so it was a little more easily done with these athletes because we would take our blood samples about every 3 months, so we were able to follow them for a period of time. We did see some fluctuations during the year, and the ones that didn't get the supplement were the ones that tended to have the lower iron status.
I see. Okay, and this was all women then?
No, it was both women and men.
Both. Okay. And now back to the cold studies. Now, were you able to use your chamber for cold too, or did you have to?
We were able to go down to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you have people in there just in their shorts or shorts and a t-shirt, that's a cold environment.
Yeah.
So we were able to do several studies looking at how it affected fat metabolism.
I see.
In one of those studies, we actually put the subjects also in a cold water bath to help cool their body temperature down even more.
Yeah.
And then had them exercise.
Was it a hard time getting subjects?
Well, I think they recruited some of the other graduate students.
Probably.
To be their subject.
Dave Costa was telling me about taking muscle biopsies. He says everyone in the lab had it, including himself. So the same idea. You had a lot of 20-plus graduate students. Did you introduce them to ACSM?
Yes, we tried to take them especially to the regional chapter meetings.
Southeast.
The Southeast ACSM, and have them actually present their first studies there so that they got a chance to be exposed not only to ACSM but also to other studies that were being done and to give them a chance to present for the first time.
Are some of your students still involved?
Quite a few of them.
I bet. Yeah.
Yes.
And have any gone on to leadership positions or won awards or anything? Or?
Well, certainly they have done well in their own field.
Yes.
I have quite a few of them who are here this week, and I've been going to, most of them are poster sessions, so I've been going to see.
So a little reunion too, right?
See what they're doing and to meet some of their students who are also presenting. So.
I think that's neat because now they're bringing their students here.
Yes.
And this is pretty much what everyone said, that there's another generation of students being introduced to the college, which is very nice. We, in our meeting earlier this morning, actually, we were talking about Title IX.
Right.
And I just wondered if you could comment a little bit about that. Just, from your perspective, here's someone that lived through it and what it was sort of like before and after.
Right.
And the effects you saw. I mean, some of them were probably pretty fast, pretty dramatic.
Well, yes, I think there were two things that particularly I saw. The first was, it happened while I was working on my Ph.D. And to see the younger girls now have an opportunity to participate in sports, even at the high school level, because most of the high schools then started to field competitive teams in sports that they hadn't previously been competing in. It's been fun to watch what's happening at the college level and with the women trying to catch up with the men in terms of the number of scholarships. So that part of it I've really enjoyed, seeing the competition.
And the opportunity.
The opportunity that's available now that really wasn't available as I was going through school. But the other thing I saw, and this was almost immediately, was the positions. When you were being interviewed for faculty positions, there were very few women exercise physiologists who were teaching in the university systems. And so there were a number of, I guess, problems occurring at that time because it was at that point that they started appointing officers in the universities to make sure that Title IX was being
sort of affirmative action.
Affirmative action officers.
Yeah.
And so you often would get questions about how you were treated in interviews, and
so that was pretty quick. I mean, that happened right away.
Right away, because when I first started interviewing for faculty positions, I noticed that was happening, and whether or not I felt I'd been treated fairly and that type of thing. And that's really when I think you see a big wave of young women becoming college professors in the exercise sciences and biomechanics and exercise physiology.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've seen in talking to a lot of people too is that they sort of came out of a sports background too.
Yes.
And so given that opportunity to play highly competitive sports, furthered that even more in the sense that they are already interested in exercise.
Yes.
So why not study it, you know? And because every woman I've interviewed has sort of said the same thing, is that what I was really interested in was sports. And then I got into this. So in '72, you were still at Penn State?
I was still at Penn State.
Did you see, you know, what was going on there as far as women's sports? Did they? Well,
I think Penn State was better about having competitive teams because they had swimming and
already in place.
Already in place.
Yeah.
They hosted the national championships for the women in swimming while I was there.
Okay.
They had basketball, field hockey, lacrosse. I don't know whether they had volleyball. They probably did have volleyball. I just wasn't aware of it. I'm sure they had tennis because they had really good facilities.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had a number of women faculty members who taught a lot of the skill courses, and I think those individuals also then coached the teams.
Was Dorothy Harris there?
Dorothy Harris was there. She was in sports psychology.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I thought so. Yeah, and John Lucas?
John Lucas, a sport historian.
Yeah, okay. They had a really good faculty when you were there, and I'm sure they still do, but that was a very good place to be when you were there. I mean, that was
well,
a very
I think
good,
so. Yeah.
So, in the last few minutes, you've been into college a long time. You've seen a lot of things. How do you think it's going? Where we're at and where we're going? And
well, I've been watching how much this college has grown over the time that I've been a member, and it's wonderful to see the growth and to see so many younger people coming into the profession.
Yeah.
I also think the regional chapter growth, I'm part of the Southeast region, and to watch how that has grown as well, and what an important part that's also playing in bringing people into the profession.
Yeah, this new student initiative and so forth that Jim Povarnik put in, I forgot what meeting it was now, but they were saying how many of those have actually come out of the regional chapters. So
I'm sure that's true.
That's been a very good thing. Well, anyhow, we're sort of out of time. I told you it would go very fast. So, Emily, I appreciate it very much that you would come and spend some time with us this morning. So.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it was fun.